If there's one thing that the internet's good for, it's for expressing your hatred for video games that you've never even played before. Believe me, I'd know. But these days, I like to think that I have some sliver of credibility when it comes to reviewing games, so rather than just joining in on the Cyberpunk 2077 dogpile, I thought it best to actually play it. And I'll be honest with you, it's really not that bad, but it also ain't that great either. Now, you gotta understand, I was never all that hyped for this game. I mean, when they announced this game's release date originally, I was like... And then they delayed it like 38 times, and while everyone else was having a meltdown about it, I was like... But then the unreleased Steam version of Dwarf Fortress had one new sprite added to it, and I was like...
Real shit?
I've actually never even played the CD Projekt Red game before, so I guess you could say that I went into this game without a whole lot of hype and without gigantic expectations. And don't get me wrong, the game has plenty of flaws, but it also has plenty of things that it does well. And just as a disclaimer, due to either a bug with OBS Studio or just down to how hard this game was frying my hardware, a lot of the footage has come out looking really choppy. So if you see any really bad stuttering in any footage shown, that's why. My game didn't actually run like that, and I apologize for any low quality footage, but I only found out about 30 hours in, so yeah. Cyberpunk 2077 takes place in the shittiest city on Earth, and unsurprisingly, it's in America. You play as V, a street urchin / corporate yuppie / nomadic murder hobo turned mercenary, who is drafted into a big heist by a man who is clearly going to screw you over to steal something from the most powerful corporation in the world. Unsurprisingly, everything goes to absolute shit and you end up with evil fuckboy Johnny Silverhand living inside your head as he slowly starts to take control of your entire being. So you immediately begin doing random side missions as he eats away at your rapidly fading conscience, as if that's a good thing to be doing at your limited time. For the first time in video game history, play as Keanu Reeves. The game starts very slowly. It took a while before I really got into it. The first 5 to 6 hours are very linear, you're just following the story as it goes more or less. And when a game is linear, you don't want it to dick you around, which is kinda what it does. Out of those first 5 to 6 hours, maybe 30 minutes, an hour of it at most, is spent actually playing the game. The rest is spent sitting through cutscenes and dialogue or other monotonous garbage that nobody actually cares about. This is then directly contrasted by the Johnny interlude after the first act that is straight to the point. Short dialogue drops you into the action, straight to the point, plenty of fun. After that I sat there and wondered why the entire first part of the game had to be such a slog in comparison. After this, the game properly opens up and you're free to explore the city and do missions at your own pace, which works for it much better. This is still a proper RPG, so there is an absolute shitload of dialogue. If you're more of a straight to the action kind of guy, then this isn't the game for you. One thing that the game also does is allow you to choose your starting backstory, either a street kid, corpo, or nomad, which really changes nothing other than the first 30 minutes of the game, along with a few extra dialogue choices down the track. I would've liked a little more character customization, perhaps something Saints Row-esque with multiple voice options, as I feel that the Corpo V would probably talk a little different to the Street Kid or Nomad V. I was also very disappointed at the lack of an option for a damaged forehead tattoo from Suicide Squad, but I digress. Now, we have to talk about the combat. Not that it makes up much of the game, but it's probably the part that you look forward to the most. And it's kinda... Melee combat in first-person games has always been dogshit. There are 2 video games that have good first-person melee combat, and they're basically the exact same game. Cyberpunk 2077 is no exception. It's clunky and just has you mashing left-click, maybe throwing in a flashy execution cutscene to make it feel somewhat satisfying. The gunplay was a lot more fluid, nothing groundbreaking, and perhaps a little unbalanced across weapon types, but good enough to keep the game interesting. I personally got the most enjoyment from putting a silencer on a revolver and going around one-tapping everyone, or just getting a bolt-action sniper and running around like it's Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. One thing I do hate is how your companions seem to shout at you every time you execute a kill, even while in stealth.
Hey, leave a little for me!
Yeah, right, just fucking let them know we're here. But it's okay, because the AI is largely incompetent. You're safe shouting at each other because you can shoot them right in the face and they don't even see you. Following a common AAA trend, stealth is an important part of combat and allows you to sneak up behind people and press one button to win. And as with many other games, the AI has to be as near brain dead and deaf as possible for it to work. See this? That's cool. Crawling up behind people and pressing the F key? That's fucking boring. There's a big emphasis on hacking in Cyberpunk, which I was rather skeptical about using at first, but it did blend nicely with the stealth side of the combat in particular. You could use it to harm or distract enemies or to scope out areas, though I have to wonder why anybody in Night City bothers using security cameras when they can be disabled so easily by just staring at them for long enough. On a technical level, this game is incredibly inconsistent. Sometimes the game is looking pretty and then 2 seconds later the NPC you're talking to starts speaking telepathically because their mouth forgot to start animating. On an overall visual level, I certainly wouldn't say that the game was bad, it was beautiful, and I really liked the cyberpunk aesthetic as well, so that was a big positive in my books. But it didn't really blow my dick off, you know? Certainly not enough to justify the toll that it takes on your hardware. I was playing with the GTX 1080 and an i7-8700K and I could not run the game at more than 30 FPS in 2K resolution. I had to settle on high at 1080p to be able to even play at 144Hz, but the game certainly wasn't at 144 frames the whole time. Optimization is clearly an issue, and I feel that the game tries to do too much at once rather than just making it a more accessible title to run. My hardware isn't the very latest, but it's still good enough to play everything else I've thrown at it at 2K at a stable 60 FPS at the very least. And I think that it's pretty clear that this game should not have been released on last generation consoles. When even mid-range gaming PCs are having problems running it smoothly, how is it ever going to be anything but a total disaster on a fucking Xbox One? To be fair, I think the game's at its most beautiful when you step back and take in the scenery. The character models are great and all, but many other models, especially things like food, look like PlayStation 3. That and up close you'll start to notice how packed to the rafters with visual bugs and glitches the game is, which didn't absolutely kill the game but did break your immersion a little bit, especially for a game that's so story heavy. Sometimes they were good for a bit of a laugh though. There was that bit with that Royce guy where you pulled a gun on him, only I didn't actually pull a gun on him. I gave him the old invisible gun trick from the 4Kids version of Yu-Gi-Oh! But when the character animations work, they're fantastic. I can certainly appreciate that the dialogue isn't just a bunch of static auto-generated bullshit. I've played Skyrim enough times. It looks more natural and honestly makes it more worthwhile to sit through cutscenes rather than skip them. There are other things about the game that bugged me, like how people driving cars are incompetent. They can't even figure out how to go around an object that is slightly blocking their path. Didn't game developers figure out how to do that in like GTA 3? It's clear that this game was simply not released in a finished state, and this is not something we should be sweeping under the rug and excusing. It's bad practice, and I know in the past I've blamed lazy developers as the cause of this sort of thing, but in all honesty it's also due to ridiculous deadlines and pressure from the gaming community as well. I mean, people were legitimately sending death threats to developers after the game was delayed, which is straight up not okay. I think we as consumers could also do our bit to not encourage this sort of thing by not only calling it out when it happens, but also perhaps maybe just being a little more patient with developers as well. Where this game really shines is through its characters and its story. The most amazing thing that Cyberpunk 2077 does is create characters that you actually care about, something that so many story-driven games fail to do. I think that this is backed up by the expressive character animations as well as very solid voice acting that makes line delivery convincing and effective. The weakest link in all honesty was probably V themselves, who played out a little generic, but did show genuine emotion and was still someone I could get behind and sympathize with. As mentioned, there is a lot of dialogue to sit through in this game, but I didn't mind doing it. Sometimes it went off explaining shit that nobody really cares about, but a lot of it was well written and interesting, and it shows the benefit of having proper writers working on the game to help elevate characters from being one-sided and generic to people that we actually give a shit about. I also really liked the tense atmosphere that the game set. You never knew who to trust or if the next person you talked to was gonna fuck you over. The whole identity of Night City was important to how the story played out, and it did it in a believable way. One complaint that I have with the story that I briefly touched on earlier is that one of the major plot points was V living on borrowed time as they slowly succumbed to the relic planted inside of their head. But then you're also encouraged to go out and explore this big open world and do missions for every bastard that continually calls you on the phone. I really didn't like that. I don't think V would be spending all their time doing side quests and odd jobs if they were a ticking time bomb. I get that it adds tension and motivation to the narrative, but I really just don't think it works to have something like this in an open world game, especially one that's meant to be stretched out by its extra content and side missions. That being said, some of the side missions I still felt compelled to do because I actually gave a shit about the people associated with them and was interested to see how they played out. There's a fair amount of generic copy-paste side quest nonsense scattered around the map, but some of them are actually really worthwhile, and diving into them and the dialogue that comes along with them was some of the best parts of the Cyberpunk 2077 experience. Overall, the biggest thing I feel after looking back on my time spent with Cyberpunk 2077 is pure ambivalence. There were many things I liked about it, but many more that marred the experience. One minute the game has you hooked, the next it's on the verge of breaking. If there's one word to describe it, it's inconsistent. I certainly wouldn't call this a great game. It didn't absolutely blow me away, it didn't change my life, and it has flaws that can be quite easily pointed out. It wouldn't have made it into my top 5 games of 2020. I think a big reason that there was so much disdain and schadenfreude about this game is that on the internet, especially social media, it's so easy to take things at a face value. And if you isolate the issues that this game has, then at face value, it looks like a busted up piece of shit. There's much more about this game that you won't see on a funny glitch compilation. If you're out there specifically looking for things to be mad about in Cyberpunk, you're not going to enjoy it. This game isn't a masterpiece, but it's certainly far from being a disaster piece too. Cyberpunk 2077 was for me an enjoyable gaming experience and makes me think that maybe I should play The Witcher 3 too. But to be brutally honest, it's still not my favorite game in the Cyberpunk genre.